Another Supreme Court justice is being exposed for having a wealthy sugar daddy. This time, it's Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito.
Supreme Court justice is under scrutiny. A new report from ProPublica claims Samuel Alito accepted a lavish vacation from a conservative billionaire with frequent business before the High Court. The report comes amid calls to reform the court's ethics. Scott McFarland has the latest.
Good morning. Tuesday's report says Justice Samuel Alito accepted a luxury fishing trip from Republican mega donor Paul Singer, but didn't recuse himself years later when cases connected to Singer's business came here before the High Court.
Yeah, that's because Alito was bribed, and Singer was like, "You remember all those times I scratched your back and gave you all that money? Now it's time for you to scratch my back."
Even before this reporting published, Alito was mounting a response. The report says Justice Samuel Alito did not report gifts on annual financial disclosure forms, including a private flight to Alaska and other amenities provided by billionaire hedge fund manager Paul Singer during a fishing trip in 2008. The report details that in July of that year, they stayed at the King Salmon Lodge and were served multi-course meals of Alaskan king crab legs or Kobe filet. They also enjoyed wine that cost $1,000 a bottle.
Wow, that's a pricey bottle. And we all know that rich people don't just give away their money for nothing. They give away their money when they know they can get something in return. That's why there's all these charities and stuff. That's because the rich people know they're going to get tax breaks and write-offs for all that money.
According to ProPublica, Singer's Manhattan-based hedge fund was involved in at least 10 cases brought before the Supreme Court, many of them high-stakes business cases. Those cases were heard after that fishing trip in 2008, with one decision in 2014 when the High Court voted 7-1 in Singer's favor. And Justice Alito did not recuse himself from any of them. In an op-ed published hours before ProPublica's report, Justice Alito denied what he dubbed charges made against him. In reference to the ride on that private plane, Alito said that Singer allowed me to occupy what would have otherwise been an unoccupied seat.
Okay, but why did he ask you to occupy this otherwise unoccupied seat? What a lame excuse anyways. It's like, well, nobody was sitting in that seat, so Spanger asked me to come sit in it so it would be occupied. Like, what a dumbass. I mean, this guy is supposed to be smart. Can't you come up with a better excuse?
And that he stayed in a modest one-room unit. Alito wrote that he followed what I understood to be standard practice by excluding the flight from his financial report.
So is it standard practice for the Supreme Court justices to lie about the bribes that they take? I guess so.
Alito is the latest justice to respond to claims of undisclosed gifts and luxury travel. Earlier this spring, Democrats called on Justice Clarence Thomas to step down after ProPublica reported he'd accepted decades of luxury travel from a donor. It's important to note the Judicial Conference just recently.
Yeah, Clarence Thomas was accepting bribes from a dude that loves Nazi memorabilia because he is a Nazi.
Require justices to disclose travel accommodations to social events. Vlad, Anne-Marie.
All right, Scott, thank you very much. For more on this, let's bring in one of the two reporters who published this story, Josh Kaplan. He reported on this story with Justin Elliott. Josh, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So explain to us a bit more about who billionaire Paul Singer is and his connection to Justice Alito.
Right. So Paul Singer is a hedge fund billionaire and one of the largest donors in the country to Republican candidates and causes. And he also has repeatedly had business before the Supreme Court. And we found that Singer took a luxury fishing trip with Sam Alito to.
It's funny how right-wing talking heads love to scream about how movements on the left are funded by wealthy people, while their supposed grassroots movements are the ones actually funded by rich people.
Alaska, and not only joined him on the trip, but also flew him there on a private jet. We're told that if Alito had chartered the plane himself, it could have cost easily more than $100,000.
Well, $100,000 is a pretty pricey trip just to get there. And this rich dude just basically gave him a free $100,000 ticket for nothing. I doubt that.
Okay, so I know that we're not going to do your reporting justice because ProPublica always does really good research, and there's levels to this, as they say, right? It's not as simple as a straight line from point A to point B. But that being said, let us talk about the kinds of cases that came before the court that were connected, maybe not directly, but connected to Singer. You know, there's, in particular, we're talking about a case with Argentina that comes before the court over and over again, and they don't take it up until they do.
Right. So Singer's head.
Wait, Argentina the nation? He sued Argentina the nation in a U.S. court? That's pretty interesting.
Fund is kind of modeled off. It's best known for taking investments that can make them a lot of money, but might require a bruising legal fight. And after this trip, his hedge fund came before the court at least 10 times. So many of these are from this decade-long battle that this hedge fund was having with the nation in Argentina. About 20 years ago, Argentina was in a devastating economic crisis.
Wait, so he was able to sue the nation of Argentina in a U.S. court? And what, the Argentinian government is supposed to abide by that? Can a citizen sue any other nation in a U.S. court, and the U.S. courts be able to force that nation to do something? That's pretty wild.
And for Singer, this created opportunity. He bought the country's debt at a steep discount and then went to the ends of the earth trying to get them to pay him back in full. And so throughout this really brutal litigation, both sides kept appealing to the Supreme Court. And in 2014, the Supreme Court agreed to intervene. And Alito did not recuse himself, and he ruled with a majority in Singer's favor. Singer's hedge fund ultimately made $2.4 billion from its Argentina gambit.
Yeah, and as you know, Justice Alito, so people understand, and they saw this a little bit in Scott McFarlane's report for CBS News, but you and Justin sent the justice a series of questions to confirm what you had already reported on, and you were getting ready to publish the piece, and he then, in an attempt to, I guess, preempt your story, put out an op-ed on in the Wall Street Journal editorial pages. And one of the things that he says, and again, why this is an important story and why what you and Justin are reporting on is an important for the American people is these justices have an enormous power over the lives of ordinary Americans. And at one point in the op-ed that Justice Alito writes, he says that the seat on the private jet would have gone unoccupied. Like, just logically think about it for 1 second. If there's a first-class seat and you're in economy on a commercial airline, can you say to the flight attendant, well, you know, no one's sitting in that seat. What's the big deal, right? So this is why your reporting is so important. And so just break down for us what happened. You sent these questions to Alito, and then you didn't hear anything back, and the first word that you got of his response was from the Wall Street Journal?
Actually, the first word we got from his response was the Supreme Court's head spokesperson telling us he wasn't going to respond to our questions. We were eager to hear his perspective. And then a few hours later, there was this op-ed in the Wall Street Journal, which was a bit of a surprise, but we're glad to hear from him in any forum. And what he said essentially is that, one, he didn't have to recuse himself from the cases. He said he wasn't even aware that Singer's hedge fund was connected to Singer, and that he didn't really know Singer that well, actually.
Wow, he didn't know Singer was connected to his own hedge fund, and claims he didn't really know Singer. Yeah, okay, so if you didn't know the dude, why is he giving you such lavish vacations and stuff? That's pretty wild. Yeah, like this dude just randomly got asked by some stranger to come onto his plane and go onto a vacation.
And he also said he didn't have to disclose this. He said his interpretation of the rules, where he doesn't have to disclose private jet flights, is, basically was a common interpretation amongst the Supreme Court justices as he understood it, which it's worth noting here that
You would think private jet flights would mean the Supreme Court justices' own jet flights that they, either buy or charter, not just anybody's private jet. That's wow, what a way to interpret the law. Then, the Supreme Court used to be a good thing. It used to be a way to prevent the other branches from getting too corrupt, but it's becoming even more corrupt in the other branches.
we talked to a lot of ethics law experts. They all said that private jet flights clearly have to be disclosed by law. But I think what this underscores here is the lack of transparency and oversight at the Supreme Court.
Yeah, we now need some kind of either new branch or something, or a investigation force or something to keep these justices in line. We also need to remove. We need to give them term limits, because the fact that they are there permanently allows them to be as corrupt as possible, because they know they're not going to be removed.
There are very few restrictions on what gifts justices can accept, which is a stark contrast from other branches of government. Those are rules meant to prevent conflicts of interest. And then when a potential conflict of interest arises, and it's time for a justice to potentially recuse themselves, the only person who decides that is the justice themselves.
So you just brought up the point that there's two things that I got out of your reporting, right? One is that there are some long-standing relationships. You bring up the Federalist Society. There are some years-long relationships that these justices have with people, that it's not necessarily organic. It's by design to connect with other conservative, sometimes big donors, like-minded people who may eventually end up on the Supreme Court. But the other big thing is, when it comes to ethical standards, it is up to the interpretation of the individual court justice, and there's no check on them.
So they basically have unlimited power, and unlimited power corrupts.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. For recusal, for instance, there is a very high standard in the law for when a judge has to recuse themselves, but it's very subjective. And in the lower courts, if a judge doesn't recuse themselves, that can be appealed. But with the Supreme Court, that's not how it works. There's no one that justices have to ask. There's no policy that at least the public's aware of, and their decisions are final.
Yeah,
people should read the article.
It's an incredible piece of reporting. Joshua and Justin, your partner who wrote this with you, you guys did incredible work here. And it's just interesting to note that Justice Alito also points out that, in addition to the unoccupied seat on the private jet, as Joshua just indicated, that he didn't really know Singer. So you go on luxury trips with people you don't know.
Well, if you're getting it for free, you just might. But I think it speaks to just how complicated these.
No, I don't know how many trips I'm gonna take with some random stranger who says, "Hey, I chartered this plane for $100,000. You want to come ride it with me?" I'd be like, you're kind of weird. No.
Background relationships are.
But also
who's a
admitting,
friend, who's not a friend.
In his op-ed, that he doesn't pay attention to a lot of the cases that come before the Supreme Court, as if that is some kind of a rebuttal. Josh.